This is the farmhouse where I grew up, where my father grew up, where my grandfather grew up, where my great-grandfather grew up. The main house was built in 1860. We got electricity in 1943 with the Rural Electrification Act. And now what I am doing is I'm removing the majority of the 1960 updates and reverting the era back to somewhere between 1920 and 1950. I'm going to show you each room in the order that I did them years ago. While I am no more of a carpenter or a designer than any member of my family has ever been, I'm doing it to suit me and my tastes. The next room we're going to cover is the pantry. In this image, you'll see past the range, that was the pantry, and we've already covered how hard it was to get in the pantry. So this episode is going to be about what we did to the pantry to upgrade it. She who must be obeyed always wanted a wall switch in the pantry instead of the pull chain in the center of the room. And I explained to her that you can't because the ceiling is horsehair plaster and lath. However, the day that the ceiling fell down, I looked at her and I said, now you can have your wall switch. And if you'll notice in the background, we started to take the drywall off the walls and we discovered the wide pine plank boards that were under it. So we decided we were going to completely remove all the drywall and use the wide plank boards. Now the reason why they had those wide boards is this was the very first drywall that came out, and it was very thin. It was only 3/8 of an inch thick. It needed a solid backing to go up on the wall, and they put the wide planks, and they are really nice planks when we got it all torn off, as you'll see in the future. So to give her light, I pulled down a couple strips of the lath and started to run the Romex from the light to the wall and then down inside the wall. And pulling some more of the thin drywall off the wall, I installed the box and gave her her wall switch. And we had to install a different style antique school globe because the nice one that you saw earlier, apparently one of the times that I put it up, I did not tighten the screws good enough, and it loosened and hit the floor and shattered. Since we were working on the ceiling, we bought these tongue and groove boards, and we were going to paint them and put them up on the ceiling. I started with a piece of Luan 4x8 plywood, and then I started putting up the ceiling. However, because we had pre-finished them, the wood had swelled, and you could not put the tongue into the groove. So what I ended up doing was breaking off the groove so that I could lay them over each other like shiplap, because they simply would not go together because of the latex paint we used. And here you can see that I am face nailing them. Not what I wanted to do. And the ceiling went up reasonably okay, considering that we had to face nail and then putty and repaint to touch up where the nails were. And as you can see, it looks pretty good. And we had started pulling some more of the drywall off the walls, exposing the wide pine boards. And then I started scraping down the door to the cellar. And if you notice, right above my head, there is a white hinge. And that hinge was supposed to be black japanned cast iron hinge, except that there was so many layers of paint on them that they could not be even taken apart, and they were ruined. And as we went through the layers of paint on the door, we got down to a section where they had faux finished the door to make it look like a higher end door than it really was. That was something from around 1900 that was done. And with the door mostly stripped, we continued to pull down cabinetry and remove more of the drywall, exposing the wide plank boards. And here you can see where I built a custom electrical panel that has lights for the cellar, heat for the cellar, 2 receptacles, and the switch for the kerosene transfer pump, because I heat with kerosene. And then we started tearing up the floor. Under the vinyl was plywood, and under the plywood was the wide plank boards painted ochre from circa 1860. And again, more of the prying up of the plywood sheets on the floor. And the washer was removed from the wall and pushed over on the opposite wall to get it out of the way. And there you could see that there is some water discoloration and a bit of punkiness in the plywood, but luckily it did not extend to the original flooring. And with the floor completely removed, we saw the shadow line of it looked like some kind of a wall that went across from the doorway into the living room straight through to the outer wall of the pantry. And we suspect that this room might have been the original kitchen. And here you can get a better look at that shadow line in the ochre paint on the floor. And then in preparation for leveling the floor, we put a new oak threshold on the cellar door. You can see how far the floor is out of level. And here we're getting ready to level the floor. I've got heavy plastic down on the floor, and you can see to the side of me is the screed board, so I know what's level, and I'm dumping bags of play sand on the floor. And here I am leveling it off. This is an old-time way of leveling a floor. The only upgrade that I'm doing is I'm putting down plastic so the sand will not go through the floor, which happened back in the day, and the plastic will prevent that from happening. And with the sand down and level, we covered it with another layer of plastic, and on top of that we put 3/8 plywood and screwed that straight through into the original floor. And here you can see another shot from a different angle of the floor that is pretty near level. Now what you do after you got the plywood on is you walk on it, and the floor will feel squishy, and then all of a sudden it gets hard because you finally squished the sand around until the density is the same all around the room. And then we had the floor covered with a remnant of what they called battleship linoleum. Now back when we were stripping the walls of the plywood, what you see behind those curtains is the old doorway into the living room that was closed off when I was a kid, and it was used as kind of a spice pantry. So with the wall completely stripped to the pine planks, I started removing everything that was in that pantry. And then using a skill saw, I cut the white board into sections so I could pull it away. And that got me to the nailers and the masonite wall boards on the back side of it from the living room. And we did have a long discussion about whether we should open that doorway back up again, but ultimately we didn't. And what we decided to do was take the leftover unfinished ceiling from the pantry and put that up as wall boards. And with a hanger, we turned that area into a little mini broom closet. And notice the hole above the brooms is open. That is for heat transfer because there is no heat in that room. And then above the one window in the room, what I did was I took little squares of Luan plywood, primed them, and covered them with every single color that we were using in the house. And on the back with a label gun, I marked down what it was, because what we were finding is as these paint companies change their base color, you can't create the colors that we already had, where if you had a sample and they could scan it, then they could make it. So that's why we did that display on top of the window. And that is how we redid the basic room. In upcoming episodes, you'll see how we filled the room.